Sorry, Snoopy. You can't go with us. Dogs aren't allowed on the school bus. Woof.
Hey guys, so I'll admit I haven't been the best at posting videos, and it's been quite a while since I've actually posted one, and by that I mean 8 months. So today I've actually decided to crawl out my little quarantine hole and actually make the effort to film a video rather than scrolling through the same 3 apps on my phone continuously, consisting of Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and occasionally Among Us, only to get bullied by some kid who doesn't even know how to play the game. I decided to film this video also because it's winter break currently, even though there's only 2 days left of it. But I decided to actually kind of set up everything and just film a video for fun. For the past few weeks, I've actually been noticing this dress that's really popped up in my Instagram Explore page, and it's made by the company called Selkie, which is owned by a designer called Kimberly Gordon, and I thought the dress was overall super appealing. It really embodies that whole puff trend that's going on right now, and I also think that it's super cool that a lot of new and fun silhouettes are really getting into stores today. And I thought it was super cute until I checked the price, and it was a whopping $250, which is why I'm making this video today. And I'm gonna try and recreate it, or at least to the best of my ability, and we'll see how that goes. For my fabric, I'm actually using some pink crepe fabric that's not necessarily the same as organza, but it does have that bit of sheerness and drapiness, so hopefully it kind of carries the same silhouette and puffiness of the dress. Back in July, I actually bought some more of this fabric. I actually didn't know how much fabric I was supposed to get for a specific article of clothing, and I still don't know now, so I would just panic in the back of the line, hoping that maybe if I rounded it up to some random whole number, it would be fine. So I ended up getting a normal 2 yards of fabric that I never ended up using anyways until now. A few days ago, I actually went to Joann's to get the rest of the fabric, and it's just me, or I get so intimidated by everyone at the store. I feel like the vast majority of everyone there is just a bunch of 6-year-old grandmas, and it's honestly like a whole gamble, whatever you call it. Like, half of them are probably gonna be the sweetest people you ever meet and are willing to help you with everything, and then the rest of them are just gonna silently judge you. Also, sorry if my camera keeps moving. I think this is the 3rd time that I'm filming this video. It's pretty clear that I haven't been in front of a camera for a long time, unless you consider Zoom meetings, which are just a whole different breed on its own, so we're not gonna go there. I remember back when the galas were a bit more serious and they placed arrows at the floor, I got yelled at by one of the ladies for not following the arrows on the floor, and honestly that's a bit traumatizing, but yeah, I think about it every time I go back to Joann, so that's pretty cool. For the rest of my materials, I got some thread, an invisible zipper, and a 5'1" girl who always manages to mess up everything. Piece of paper to actually trace out the patterns. So right now I'm using some recycled wrapping paper that I got from Christmas, and just hoping that I can actually substitute for it. The thing is though, they have like this kind of 1-inch square they could kind of use as a graph. Hopefully I can actually use it to my advantage and reduce, recycle, kids.
Sorry, Snoopy. You can't go with us. Dogs aren't allowed on the school bus. Woof.
When I first started making this dress, I honestly had no idea what to measure and how to make the patterns for the bodice until I saw this video by this YouTuber, and ended up being super helpful, as she basically did a whole step-by-step of the different parts of the bodice to cut out in order to make it as flattering as possible, and I thought hers turned out super well, if I say so myself. Here I'm just cutting out one of the 2 layers of the basic bodice pieces together using patterns from earlier, and I'm just pinning it together so it's a lot easier to cut and it's hopefully a bit more accurate. To kind of break down how the whole bodice works, I basically split it into 5 sections, 1 being the center front, 2 for the side panels, and 2 symmetrical pieces for the back, making sure to leave some seam allowance for the zipper that I'll be adding in as well, which is about 1/4 of an inch. By doing so, I can add a curve to the bodice, so it would be more flattering in the chestal region, and it would overall have a nicer silhouette, which I guess wouldn't be that huge of a difference considering I literally have a body type of a door myself. For the skirt, I actually already cut out part of the fabric before I decided to make a video for this, so you don't get to see that part, which might be a good thing since it was basically just an hour of me struggling to cut a decent circle without a pattern. And before I really looked into how the dress was actually made, I assumed it was just 3 layers of circle skirts gathered and sewed on top of each other, which, if you think about it, is just a bunch of fabric. In case you don't know what a circle skirt is, it's basically a circle. It's kind of self-explanatory, but depending on how much of a circle you use really determines how full the skirt ends up being. And originally I was going to use a full circle skirt, which would have taken a bunch of fabric, but after scrolling through their Instagram, I realized it was basically 3 long rectangles gathered together. Obviously it was too late to change plans, so I ended up keeping the circle skirts and I cut out a large rectangle for the outermost layer, making it around 2.5 times my original underbust circumference in order to really save a good amount of fabric. I then pinned the bodice together to make sure it fit well before sewing it together, which leads to probably the most painful stage of making this dress, also known as actually sewing it and putting it together.
Life goes so fast, I've been living so slow. Let's just leave, do whatever we want to. I don't want no regret, nor any days.
If my 8 months of sewing experience has taught me anything, like the 5 stages of grief, this also applies to sewing apparently, as I realized I kind of messed up the entire project. So about a month has passed, and admittedly I haven't been touching this project that much, mainly because of the fact that I realized that the fabric I was using just wasn't going to work out. A few weeks back I was working on the overskirt of the dress, and I ended up taking a long rectangle and just tried gathering it together, and I learned 2 things that day. That 1, the rectangle just wasn't long enough and I didn't have enough fabric to cover for it, and 2, it just didn't give that kind of voluminous effect that I was looking for. Turns out, compared to an organza fabric, a crepe fabric has a bit more of a billowy and drapey effect compared to an organza, which is definitely a lot more stubborn and gives a kind of voluminous effect to it if it's gathered. I wish I realized that sooner because that would have saved so much trouble. So last week I ordered some organza fabric off this online store called Mood, and it came a few days ago, as you can tell by this package on my desk. Unfortunately, the fabric came a bit darker than I expected it to be, but I think at this point I just want to get this dress done. I want to wear the dress, I want to embody it, I want to bathe in my pride, if it's not already torn to pieces by then. I think for the crepe fabric, I'm probably just going to use it for a different project, also known as the original project I was going to use it for, which really makes me question why didn't I do that in the first place. I really could have saved all of that trouble and just put it aside and just gotten this fabric, which is beyond me. And thus began another process of cutting out the fabric. For the bodice, I decided to keep the bodice made from the crepe fabric to give a bit more of an opaque look and not potentially flash strangers in public if I decide to wear this at all. Different from the crepe fabric, the organza was a bit more, and by that I mean a lot more slippery, definitely different from the typical organza I had to work with before. And because of this, I ended up sandwiching the fabric in between some tissue paper I found lying around to really get that straight, even line, which, as you will find out later, just wouldn't have made a difference anyways. So I've been hemming this skirt for about 2 hours now. And here I am. Oh, how this dumb little girl would soon realize that she didn't need tissue paper in the first place, so ripping up all of that leftover packaging from Ritzia was nothing but a waste of time and only leaves you with an utter avalanche of paper on your desk. I also had to switch out for a thinner, sharper needle to make it easier to sew, and I guess what I can now conclude from this is that organza is quite that little fabric because, oh man, that's just a lot of commitment for this little fabric, oh my god. However, it was definitely worth the fabric switch, as once I gathered the rectangles, the skirts turned out so much better than before, so I'd say it's a pretty good success. To give a brief history on my experience with puff sleeves, when I first started sewing, I remember printing out a pattern online, except I didn't realize it was only half of what I was supposed to cut out, so I would just continue cutting out sleeves in the same way, and I just didn't know what was going through my mind. And even worse, it was using my mom's bedsheet. So that was fun. I now have a whole cluster of sleeves that can barely get past my forearm, so you learn from your lessons, kids. Here I have some elastic that I got from Joann's, and I made sure to get a knit non-roll elastic so I could easily cut it to the width I would want instead of using this whole hunk of elastic, so it's a lot more versatile, I would say. Yeah, that's all I have to say about elastic. Here's the final stretch in which it was time to actually insert the zipper and put everything together. At this point, I just felt like crawling into bed as it was a Saturday night, and by that I mean 3 in the morning. I just finished wrestling the bodice and skirt together, struggling not included, but at this point I just wanted to get this dress done, which led to another 2 hours of me just trying to sew the zipper to the dress. Beforehand, I ordered an invisible zipper foot online, which didn't even end up fitting anyways, so I had to use my normal foot. Why is the needle not? Does this even fit the machine? And because of this, I had to literally turn the sewing speed to the lowest setting, and half an hour later, with no progress done, I cried myself to sleep out of sleep deprivation. Next morning, I fixed up the zipper on a healthy 5 hours of sleep, which you are now about to see. I think out of all of the projects I've worked with, this is probably one of, if not the biggest project I've ever had to work on, which doesn't say much considering this is only the 3rd piece of clothing I've ever had to make, so it's not really competing against much. But I think I learned a lot more through this whole journey of sewing, and it really opens me up to a lot more of the sewing world. But I think what I have to say about this dress is I think it turned out pretty well, and while I wasn't pulling any selkie tier moves, I think it turned out pretty similar to the dress that I was going for, so I'm pretty proud of that. Now that we're done giving credit to myself for this dress, here are some tips and lessons that I've learned from sewing this dress in general. One of them being the overall measurements, which are just so important when it comes down to it. I think that while I didn't really think it was too big of a deal whether it was 2 or 3 centimeters off, it really did make a pretty big difference when it came to actually sewing it and putting the whole dress together. I remembered a few days ago when I finished the dress, when I zipped it up, I noticed that the bodice was different lengths on both sides, so it looked really crooked and a bit uneven. Another thing to keep in mind as well is also the measurements. Even if I had the patterns and even if I literally had to cut out a rectangle, ended up not really turning out as well. You can't really see it. You can't really see it right now, but in the back, when I zipped up the invisible zipper, I noticed that the bodice didn't actually meet up with each other, so it was kind of uneven. As you saw earlier in the video, I literally had to switch out for a different type of fabric to actually get that kind of drape and volume of the dress, which really shows how important getting the right materials is. I think it's important to actually look at the fabric and kind of the overall mechanics of it to kind of see how it drapes and how it fits before actually buying 2 yards of it. Speaking from personal experience, when I finished making this dress, I honestly couldn't help but have a bit of a sense of guilt for even making this dress in the first place. Not only did I have to buy this fabric again, but I also had to buy the fabric from before, whether I used it or not, knowing that it has a bit of an impact, knowing that it has an impact on the environment, and I think over quarantine I learned a lot more about how this kind of stuff impacts the environment, and it kind of sent me down a bit of a spiraling hole where I would constantly be curious about how I have an impact on the environment based on what I eat or what I do, including my hobbies. I think at the moment I'm still on my learning curve when it comes to this, whether it's finding that balance, such as buying secondhand items or more sustainable types of fabrics that will kind of lessen my impacts on the environment. But I guess on a happier note, this dress, yup, it's looking pretty snazzy.